some people say love is a feeling, a decision, or something that happens in the brain. So, as a psychologist, how would you define the word love?
So I would say it's all of those and probably a whole bunch more. But I think to kind of simplify it, I think in the end, love goes back down to a feeling of empathy. Um, because if I love you and I feel your pain, then I feel it as my own and I want to fix your pain because I want you to be in a good place, even if that might go against me, right? So it's kind of like, obviously you could go into love between friends, love for parents to children, love from children to parents,
Yeah.
relationship, like romantic love. And I think as a baseline to all of that, there is that kind of feeling of empathy, right? Because I take you on as part of me. And so what you feel becomes part of what I feel.
Right.
And so making you feel good is as important to me as making myself feel good.
But would you say that, I mean, love is so many things, right?
Right.
It isn't just empathy. Love can also be kind of selfish. You make me feel good, right? So
Right.
I love that feeling, but
Right.
that can still be classified as love, right?
So I would classify that as being in love, right?
Okay.
So when I look at, let's say, romantic love, right? So I look at the beginning of a relationship, somewhere like 6 months to a year in. It's so much more about how you make me feel than about who you actually are. And I think this is where most people make a mistake because they get into relationships and they get really serious really fast because it feels so good
Right.
having that person around. But at this point, they haven't actually met the real person on the other side. They've just felt what that person makes them feel. And a lot of that is actually projection more than it is actually what the other person is doing to make me feel. They're just being them. And for some reason, that makes me feel great. And so then I want to be with that person. And then in wanting to be with that person, I formalize a relationship sometimes way too soon before I've actually gotten to know the other person. So that's kind of what I call the in love phase. Now, ideally, in a romantic relationship, the in love phase and the getting to know each other process results in me now really valuing you as a person and loving you regardless of how you make me feel, because you as a person are wonderful and have the traits that I admire in someone.
Is there a statistical timeline in when that happens?
Yeah, it's about 6 months to a year.
After somebody says that they look at the other person rather than within themselves.
And I think that it's, obviously that feeling of, well, I wouldn't even say excitement. Excitement is a difficult one because I think excitement has to do more with the dopamine. And I think, from my generation and all the romantic comedy movies out there, we always looked at the butterflies as being that feeling of love, when in fact the underlying emotion, I'm going to say, or the underlying feeling is more anxiety than actual love. Love, I think, should be a place of safety and security and inner peace where you feel like you can be yourself, and a calmness, and not that up and down and is he going to text, is he not going to text, when are we going to see each other? That's more anxiety masked as love.
Right. Okay, so when you say someone is in love, it's more about that, all those feelings where I'm projecting how I feel.
Yes.
And somebody loving is more about the empathy and caring about the individual.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes, that's how I would see it.
So
And so for me, it's it's my definition, right?
Yeah.
Other people have different definitions, and you can go into the neurochemistry of it all. You can say, like in the beginning, when it's about how you do things that make me feel something, it's about the dopamine in the brain and all of these things. And then, theoretically, to go back to your question of is it in the brain, then it turns into the serotonin and the what's the cuddle hormone? I've forgotten the name now. That people feel later on in the relationship when it's more that calmness.
So if it's in the brain, then it's a feeling, right? It's like a chemical reaction in a way. Time later, it can subside, right? And then love no longer becomes that chemical reaction. It becomes more of a choosing decision.
It's a different chemical reaction.
So love is constantly evolving and changing in different forms.
Yes. Yes.
So what does it become then? Yeah.
So, and then it becomes, so there was a really old article in Time magazine sometime in the 80s, and I thought it was really interesting because it kind of went through the different neurotransmitters that people go through in different parts of the relationship. Kind of the part in the beginning where there's a lot of attraction, there's a lot of playfulness, and then theoretically, there would be a baby. So now the relationship needs a whole different set of interactions, because now it's more about creating a family. And then the theory in Time magazine so many years ago was then after around 7 years, which is why people speak of the 7-year itch, all of a sudden your body kind of resets. The child is now adult enough to take care of itself. So now theoretically we're wired to go out and meet the next person to have a child with.
Really?
Yes. I mean, it's really old, and I don't know if it's outdated, but I do think it's kind of funny how back then already we were looking at the different stages in relationships based on the different neurochemicals that are present.
I saw online some time ago, it was a conversation that I don't know the correct terms, but when you're in a relationship with one person, and then they say that in the animal kingdom that's not normal, and we forced ourselves to be in this, the whole legal marriage thing is actually something that's been forced upon people to control because it was getting out of hand. Women were having babies with just left, right, and center, and it's actually not something that is wired in a human.
Right.
What do you think about that?
I think that formalized relationships were created. It's hard to say because, you know, depending on which religion you're looking at, which culture you're looking at, you know, which society you're looking at, they all
But
have
if we
different
talk about
approaches.
science,
But
yeah.
well, if we talk about science, yeah, I think that it, even here, it's multi-layered, right? Because I think that if you look at formalized relationships, let's take it from a non-feminist perspective, maybe, where you would say, you know, back when women didn't work to make money, and so they kind of, you know, they get pregnant and then they need someone to take care of them, right? So kind of the old school version of, here's a father, he's taking care of his daughter, he walks her down the aisle and hands her over to the next man that's now going to take care of her, so that if she does have children and she can't work and she needs to take care of the children, she's taken care of, right? And so I do think that that was kind of the setup. That, and I'm going to say this in a weird way, potentially for a man who's jealous, to make sure that, you know, the person that he loved was definitely going to be his. I think when formalized marriage was created, and I'd have to look at the data, but I don't know if we lived as long as we live now. So I think, you know, let's say getting married when you're 15 and then potentially, you know, dying when you're 30, that's like a manageable amount of a relationship. But now let's assume for a second that we're going to live until we're 120, right? And now we get married at 25. Do we really think that for the next, 95 years, that one person is going to magically walk along the same path as us? And so yeah, I think it was created more to keep a society safe and structured than it really was because we have some crazy desire to be with just one person for the rest of our lives.
Do you think that it is human nature to want to be with someone for the rest of their lives, or do you feel that it is a form of discipline that I must stay with one person because that's society? But actually, as a human, as the way that I'm biologically wired, like you said, after 7 years, we just kind of seek somebody else.
Thanks, Time Magazine.
What do you think about that?
I think that this goes back to your first question, right? Of if it's brain chemistry, if it's a choice, if it's a feeling. I think that the most healthy long-term relationships are relationships that are based on a choice, where you say, okay, I want this person to be part of my life for as long as possible, right? And then you kind of say, okay, there's going to be good times, there's going to be bad times, and I will do everything I can to work through the bad times because I'm choosing to love this person. And that can sometimes be hard. It's like going to the gym. Do we always want to go to the gym? No, but if we make a commitment to ourselves that we're going to work on our health, we push ourselves to do it even when it doesn't feel right? And so I think the healthiest relationships are the ones that choose each other and choose to make the relationship work even when there are bumpy times.
Right. So going back to what you said, when people, if you get married at 25 and you live to even 80 or 90, 120, whatever, people constantly change, especially women. You know, you go through, you know, in your 20s and 30s. I mean, I think women change more than men. You find a lot of men that have quite consistently stayed the way they were, not in a bad way, but women go through so many different identities.
I also think it's linked to hormones, right?
Yeah.
Because so many different times of our lives, hormones are doing different things. And hormones impact us so much that when those hormones shift, a different side of our personality might surface, right?
Yeah.
And so it is, I think, difficult to
Yeah.
be a woman.
I wouldn't change it though.
No, I wouldn't change it either. I
Yeah.
think it's really exciting. But I do think that because men's like testosterone levels and other hormones, they stay pretty consistent, whereas ours fluctuate every month. They
Yeah.
fluctuate at different times in our lives, you know, so it's very dynamic to be with women, I think.
Yeah. It's always
You're
an
always with
adventure.
someone new, exactly.
That's right. But as time passes and as the woman changes and she becomes a mother, so now she's responsible for something, and then she starts to think, well, who am I? And all these changes, and then you have her partner next to her, and he's witnessing all of these things, and a lot of the times it goes, you're not who you were,
Right.
and all these things. How does how do two people navigate such changes? Because a lot of the time it's very easy to just it stops working out.
Yeah, and then you let it go because you can't fix it.
Yeah.
I think this is where friendship is really important in relationships.
Yeah.
I know that most people are very confused when I say that because it's like, but that's not exciting and romantic. But I think the long-term relationships that are happy and last, right? Because there's a difference between a relationship lasting and people in the relationship staying, but they're unhappy, and a relationship where two people genuinely want to work on a relationship with each other. And I think when I look back at my closest friends, we've gone through different phases, ups and downs. They've changed, I've changed, and we somehow always managed to find a way back together. And I think that's what romantic relationships or marriages kind of need, is that genuine friendship of, and even if you change and something changes in your life, I'm still going to be here and we'll just navigate that.
Accepting every version of you.
Yes. And I also think it's okay to change the nature of a relationship, right? Depending on.
What do you mean by that?
So I think a lot of people struggle when kind of that like attraction kind of goes away for a little while. And they're like, but then why am I in a romantic relationship if I don't have the attraction? But that's also when maybe you just change the type of relationship and focus more on the friendship of the relationship. And then at different times with different hormones, the attraction can come back, right? So just like you said, it's a choice, right? You decide to stay in something, you decide to work on it together, and you figure it out. Because, you know, at school we learn math and physics and all these things, but rarely do we learn child rearing or relationships. So no one ever really tells us what a relationship is. We kind of pick it up from our parents. We pick it up from romantic comedies or other movies, dramas, history books, whatever you want to call it. But nobody really kind of gives that definition of what is a relationship. A lot of people will say, but I love him so much, I want to be in a relationship with him, right? But that's not what a relationship is. And so I remember reading this somewhere, and I have to figure out where, and I can maybe post it in the link it in the thing later. But I think one has to break down the concept of relationship into two parts, right? One part is the love, right? I love you. Ideally, after 6 months, I love you for you, not for how you make me feel, right? And so I want to make you happy. You want to make me happy. It's kind of that unconditional love type thing, right? But what most people underestimate is the importance of the compatibility. Because if the compatibility isn't there, if we have a different vision for the future, then love, we've heard this saying so much, is not enough, right? And so with compatibility, I can say something like, so for example, I love to cook, right? So when I love someone, I want to cook for them. Now, let's say I'm with someone who doesn't value food that highly. And so every time he comes home, I'm like, oh, what can I cook for you to show you how much I love you? And he goes, Christina, why don't we just order in? It's going to make me feel unvaluable because now I can't give the love that I want to give because that love isn't appreciated in the other person. I see this a lot in the other way, where men tend to err towards the side of, I'm the provider, right, in a relationship. And then I get a lot of women that are like, but he goes to work and he comes home and I don't feel loved because we don't really connect and we don't really do anything. And then men feel so unhappy because they're working so hard to show their love.
Feel unappreciated.
And they feel we're unseen, right? And they feel like all this love that they are pouring into their relationship by working hard and making money, if it's not appreciated, then they feel unloved. So I think what's really important in order to figure out what the compatibility part of your relationship would be when you have the love, right? Is what do I need? What do I want? And what do I like to give? And so now, what do I need is the non-negotiable, right? It's the I need someone who wants to connect on an emotional level, right? I need I need someone who like wants the same kind of future that I have. Like for example, if I want children, I need to be with someone, or if I need to have children, I need to be with someone who also needs to have children, right? Because otherwise, you're setting yourself up for failure and a lot of struggle.
The same values.
Sure, values, and you know, different people need different things. Now, what do I want in a relationship? That's kind of the one, you know, that's kind of open, right? So it might be something I want someone who's taller than me. I don't really care about height, but a lot of people do, right? But if they now found someone who met their needs, would the height be that important, right? And so it's kind of like looking at what you want, but it's not a deal breaker, right? It's a negotiable. And then I think what's really important is to know, what do I like to give in a relationship? Because ideally, what I like to give, in my case, cooking, for example, would line up with with what someone else needs, which is I need a woman who wants to cook for me because it makes me feel loved, right? So that would be someone's need being met with something that I like to give, which then makes it compatible, right? So it's kind of the transactional part of a relationship, because if the love changes, the nature of the love, and there's still that working compatibility, then the relationship can continue, right? And so, and this is the love languages, right? Because I feel like people often are like, but what do I need in a relationship? How do I define that, right? And that's where I go back to the 5 love languages, to the quiz, because if you know what your love languages are, then you know what you need, right? And so the way that I understand love languages is and this goes back to feeling the in love part, what makes me feel loved, right? So I've been in relationships, right, throughout my life. I was with this person who would come to my house and he would constantly want to be in physical contact with me, right? Which made me feel really loved, because that's the top of my love languages list, right? And then at one point the relationship ended and we had a conversation about it. I'm like, but you love me, because I felt so loved. And he was like, no, I really like spending time with you, but like, I don't really love you. And it was so weird because there was such a disconnect between what I felt and what he felt. But because of his behavior, I felt really loved because he was constantly physically in touch with me, right? And we're talking hand holding, hugging. We're not, you know, everything can like around physical touch. And then the next relationship I had was someone who was very forthcoming. He was always very much opening my doors, pouring my drinks. When we were at a party, he was always making sure that I was taken care of.
Was this a different type of experience that you hadn't had before?
No, this was just one of the relationships, but now I can put an explanation to it, right? And so he was super caring by most people's kind of definition, but he never held my hand. He never put his arm around me. None of these things. So whenever I would come home in the evenings, I'd be like, why am I going out with this person? Like, he obviously doesn't care for me, right? But then the next morning I'd wake up and I'm like, but he, you know, he poured my drink, he opened the door, he moved my chair, he made sure I was taken care of. I'm like, that's so strange. But because acts of service is my least love language, I did not feel loved. I was able to appreciate that he was doing these things, but I didn't feel that feeling of, oh, we're connected, he loves me, right? And so that's when I started looking into love languages, right? And that's kind of but it was such a weird experience and then especially because after a while I ran into some of his friends, and then they were very surprised that I had broken off the relationship, because they're like, but he really liked you and he was really looking forward to growing with you and turning this into something. And I was like, but I didn't feel it. And so now I understand it more, and now I think it is something also to have a very open conversation with when you're in a relationship. But the love languages test is important because it'll tell you what you need, what is nice. And what I think the love language test does wrong is it should be 2 versions. It should not just be, when someone does this, I feel, or I feel loved when someone does this. There should also be the version of, I show love by. Because I did it that way. I did it both ways. And I realized that the way I show love, namely acts of service, cooking for someone, and buying gifts, are really high on my how do I love people, but really low on how do I feel loved, right? And so this is the part where if you take the test backwards, then you can find out what you like to give in relationships. Now, obviously, it's much more complex than 5 love languages. That's just a starting point for couples to kind of go, how do we connect more?